Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
Man, love that right there. If you want a 5-star review, you got to do 5-star service. That's Ryan Leake right there, a great leader in the marketplace and an ambassador for God. We're going to talk about that a little this weekend. So welcome to Crosspoint. Really excited to have you with us this weekend. And if you're here for the first time, you've joined us at the back end of a series. And so I hope that you'll be able to connect with this weekend. But I hope you dig some of this and you go back and check out some of the previous weeks. And if you are here for the first time, my name's Curt. It's great to meet you. And it's good to see all of us across our platforms, including online. Let's make some noise for those maybe spring breaking this weekend, join us from their dorm room. Maybe you're at a pool or beach this weekend. Really excited to have you join us. Now, wherever you're coming from this weekend in terms of your journey, you know, we got a whole bunch of longtime Jesus followers here at Crosspoint that, you know, we're just trying to grow, you know, and become more and more like Jesus in how we live. Every weekend, we have others who are kind of new to their journey here with us, and you're trying to say, okay, what does it look like for me to really begin to follow Jesus? And you're trying to figure things out, and that is such a cool place to be. And then, you know, some of us, you may not be a Jesus follower yet. Like, I just want you to know that we know that, and you're trying to figure things out. You're trying to say, is this something worth putting the weight of my life into? And so I just encourage you to continue to lean in. And then I know some of us, you're here, but you're like, man, I pretty much hate Christians, or at least the idea of it, you know, because you perhaps have been exposed to a version of Christianity that just wasn't all that much like Jesus. And so, like, I understand that, like, we're all in different places. And so all that to say, wherever you're joining us from this weekend, we're glad you're here. And I really hope that as we hear from Jesus today, we're going to look at one of his teachings. I really think the things we're going to look at, regardless of where you are in your journey, is going to be helpful. So we're in the final week of Thank God It's Monday, and we've been talking about work, and we've been talking about our relationship with God and how that coincides with our relationship with work. And one of the things we've been discovering is that what you do really matters. The way you engage in your daytime hours, I mean, it matters. It makes an enormous difference. And so again, if you missed any of the previous weekends, really encourage you to go back. And if you dig today and you're like, man, I didn't catch the first weeks, check them out. They're on our watch page, all 4 weeks. You can, you know, go through those at your own pace, and they're going to be there. So next weekend then is a big weekend as well. We're going to be preparing for Easter. And so I know it's kind of a travel week for many people this weekend. And so I just encourage you to kind of figure out, okay, where am I going to engage next weekend? In fact, that's one of our next steps. Hey, I'll return next weekend. Make a plan right now, whether you're going to join us on Thursday night at the early weekend service, tune in online if you're going to be out of town traveling, or perhaps join us for either of our services on Sunday, because we want to kind of set you up to have perhaps one of the best Easters ever. So today, though, we're going to be talking about leadership, and some of us might be going, okay, I'm not really a leader. What I really hope you see today is that you have more leadership than perhaps you might think. In fact, leadership at its essence really is influence. And so we all have influence in one realm or another. I mean, whether that's, you know, for some of us, you have jobs and you have influence in the workplace. For others, it might be a volunteer organization, maybe in youth sports or some community initiative, maybe in your neighborhood, in our homes. And so, you know, when we think about leadership, you know, we have to say, okay, what does that look like? Which is one of the reasons I got my mug up here. This is my World's Best Boss mug. Just, you know, I had to buy it for myself, like Michael Scott. Because actually my assistant gave me one a few years ago. She gave me a little like version to put on my Christmas tree. But, you know, I say that to say, you know, I'm learning right alongside with you. So in terms of what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a good boss, a good leader, and to steward our influence, I'm kind of in the trenches with you today. And we all kind of know the power of great leadership. Right? We know the difference that can make. In fact, in the Old Testament, we have a guy by the name of Solomon. He was a king, and he knew something about leadership. Here's what he said. He said, when the godly are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked are in power, they groan. And so a whole nation, a community, an organization rises and falls, you know, in large part on leadership. And when leaders are good, people are rejoicing. And when leaders aren't good, we groan. And so we've probably all experienced that in the workplace at some point. And so I hope that you've had some really great leaders in your life. I really do. I hope you've had, a CEO or a manager, perhaps a principal that, just was amazing and that you had the ability to enjoy that. In fact, I had a conversation with a guy this week that talked about how fun his job is. He said, I've been working for the same, guy for over 20 years, and it's just so much fun. I hope you've had some of those experiences, because when you have that, it lifts you up. At the same time, you've probably experienced being on the other end of that, where, you've had some bad leadership you've been under, and you've grown a lot. It makes us groan. But I think all of us, we want to be the kind of people that when we're leading people, they rejoice. All right, that they're flourishing in whatever work they're doing. And I'm going to tell you, that doesn't necessarily come natural to lead that way. So we're going to look at the greatest of all time on this. We're going to look at the GOAT on this, Jesus, by the way. That's who this is. And we're going to look at a story from his life. And there is a certain kind of leadership that he kind of frames out for us that's not natural, but it's essential. And it's required. For those of us that are followers of Jesus, this is like required. It says, hey, this is how I want you to operate in the world. If you're not a follower of Jesus, there are so many good takeaways from this story that you can apply this week. But, if you are a follower from God's perspective, this is one of those things where, like, when you are given leadership, you're called to steward that. And it's not just given to you, like to use for your own benefit, but actually for others. And so when you steward that leadership, how you lead, again, it's not about us. It's not about our agenda. It's not about, our grievances. It's about, how do I help the people that I'm serving? How do I help them flourish? Which is so important, because when you think about it, we spend a majority of our life in our workday. I mean, that's how we spend a majority of the middle part of each day. So what does it look like to be the right kind of leader? That's what I want us to look at this weekend. We're going to look at this story from the Gospel of Matthew, and this is one of those really kind of humorous and awkward stories, because I'm pretty sure some of the people that were there as Matthew was like taking this down, they're like, Matthew, you sure you're going to include this? I know you're trying to record what Jesus is doing, but like, if you're trying to make this account believable, you might not want to put this story in. And so I'm sure Matthew was just like, well, I mean, if I was spinning things, if I was trying to make things look better than they are, I would not include this story. But I'm just reporting history, so this is what Matthew tells us happens right here. And it's kind of funny. It's kind of a funny story. So here we go. Matthew chapter 20. It says, then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons, and she knelt respectfully to ask a favor. So at this point, she knows Jesus is more than just a normal rabbi. She's made the connection that he is really the Messiah. He's the Son of God. She learned that from some of the Old Testament prophecies. And she also realizes he's going to be a different kind of Messiah. She doesn't fully know what that means. I think a lot of people thought that he was coming to take over Rome, to take charge. Like, people still think God's wanting to do in our world today. I don't think he gives a rip about doing that with governments. I think he came to establish something entirely different. And so she's just excited because her sons are actually, in this inner circle with Jesus. And she just has this little request, or maybe not so little a request. Here's how it goes. Jesus says, what is it that you want? He asked her, and she said, I want you to grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in the kingdom. I mean, so what she's basically asking for is that, could my sons be number 2 and number 3 in the universe? Like, just a small request, right? Like Jesus, I don't want to take over your number 1 chair. I mean, if you want to talk about that, we certainly could talk about that. But, my sons, they're pretty wonderful. I mean, they're pretty, they're pretty amazing. And you have to wonder what James and John are thinking right here, right? Like, are they hearing this? Like, because they're in earshot of this. And I mean, are they like, geez, Mom, come on, quiet. Why are you being so noisy? Like, my kids, sometimes Julie and I are just talking. They're like, would you guys quiet down? Like, don't embarrass us. Are they doing that? I don't think they actually are, because Jesus actually responds to all of them. And so I don't know if this was they were all 3 in cahoots, if the mom was just like, hey, I'm going to go and make this request. If the sons, the adult sons were like, hey, Mom, could you go advocate on our behalf? I mean, helicopter moms, not something of just today. I mean, this was happening back then. Moms meddling in their grown adult sons' business. So, what Jesus says next is what leads us to the next part of the story. He says, I don't know that you know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And they were very ambitious. Like, we can. Like, we're there. They thought they were all in on this thing. We can, they answered. And I don't think they have any idea really what they're committing to right here. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup, but not to sit at my right or left, that's not for me to grant. These places belong to those whom they have been prepared for by my Father. Meaning when God comes, and it's not going to be right away, he's going to make that decision. He's going to figure that out. All right, that's his job. And so how, though, does Jesus respond to this request, though, of this mom? All right, he says, hey, I don't know if you fully understand what you're asking. I mean, and he looks at the sons. He says, are you prepared? I mean, he turns to them and says to the two of them, are you prepared to drink from this cup? And what he's talking about right here is really this idea of the cup of sacrifice and suffering, all right, that's associated with leading, of giving your life to something, of giving your life to like a divine mission. He's like, do you really understand what we're talking about here? Now, he has a similar reference back in the Garden of Gethsemane, and you may be familiar with this story. Even if you've not really been in like church circles for a while, you may have heard this part of the story. This is where Jesus is praying right before he's about to be arrested, and then he's going to be beaten, and then he's going to be crucified. And basically, he's like pleading with God. He's like, Father, would you take this cup, here's our word again, this cup away from me? Like, is there any way I don't have to drink this cup? And in essence, he's just like, man, I know the sins of the entire world are going to be put on me, and I'm gonna take those and pay for those. But man, if there's any way that I can get around this, but God, if that's your way, I'm in with your way, and that's what he ended up doing. And so that's the cup that he's talking about. And he's like, are you really prepared to take on that cup right there? That kind of sacrifice, that kind of suffering that comes when you're leading, especially leading, out front in God's kingdom mission. I mean, it's great. It's just not easy. And there's a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility. This is one of the reasons that James, not the James in this story, but Jesus' brother James, later on in the New Testament, he actually writes a letter to like Jesus followers, Christians, and he basically says to them, he says, hey, this is probably why it's better that you don't become a leader, all right? Because like leaders, they're going to be judged, to a higher standard. All right, there's a different level of accountability that they're held to, and everybody thinks they want the big chair, but they don't always know what comes with the big chair. And so what he's talking about here is what's called the mantle of leadership. All right, and again, this is something I've had to carry at times. In fact, last summer, I'll never forget this moment where I just realized the gravity of what I carry every single week in my job. And last year, we were going through a pretty difficult time here, navigating some refinance things, and for me professionally, like one of the most difficult professional seasons in my life. And we were trying to solve some solutions and try to figure out, okay, how's Crosspoint going forward, which had just an amazing solution come forward. But initially we were working on something called the Crosspoint Investment Group, where we were asking people from our community to like park capital investment in basically like an investment group to take on our note and kind of bridge a really, really difficult interest rate season that wasn't working for us. And so I was meeting with a lot of donors and people who were interested in parking investments, and I met with one guy that came and said, hey, I want to learn more about this. My wife and I, we think we want to invest in this. And he said, I'm sitting here because of Crosspoint. He said, my kids, like this is all they know. They've grown up here. Like they know Jesus because of what's happened here. And so we just really care about this. And so he gave me a number that his wife and he wanted to invest. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm like, that's awesome. I was kind of overwhelmed by that. And I asked him, I said, why would you do this? And he said, well, this is the moment I'll never forget. He said, well, we're doing this because we believe in Crosspoint, and we believe our community needs places like Crosspoint. But we're also doing this because we believe in Curt Walters. And that, I was just like, oh, wow. Because that was a season where I don't know that I believed in Curt Walters all that much. I mean, I was struggling with believing in myself. And we kind of wrapped that meeting up and finished the information, and he said, hey, let me go talk to my wife. I'll get back with you tomorrow and confirm where we're at. And so I got a call from him the next day, and he said, hey, we talked and trying to figure out our number, and I know I gave you this number, but we're going to double that. And I was like, wow, okay, whoa. I just remember in that moment going, okay, God, I need your help on this. All right? I can't do this without you. Just feeling the weight in a good way, but like people reorienting their lives around what God's doing in that mantle of leadership. I mean, that's a big chair right there. And sometimes when we get in the big chair, I mean, that's what there's like a weight to leadership, but there's also a loneliness with leadership in those moments. And so leadership comes with a weight at times. And when you're a conscientious leader, you realize, man, the decisions I make, like they impact people's lives. And, for the good, for the bad. I mean, however you lead, you are impacting people's lives, which I think is why Jesus says right here, do you know what you're asking, to this mom? Now, the other disciples, they're close by. They're in earshot of this too. They're hearing this. This is where it gets awkward. And they hear the mom and, the two brothers come to Jesus and say, hey, could we have kind of the second and third spots? And we know there have been multiple moments where the disciples kind of fought over this because Jesus had kind of had to intervene a number of times at different points. But these guys are ticked off. I mean, they're pretty hacked off. They're like, this mom is doing an end around on us. She's trying to get her sons ahead of us. We should have those positions. Jesus hears all this. Before it escalates too much, he calls them into a huddle, and here's what happens. It says, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers and the Gentiles lord it over them, over the other Gentiles. That's how they operate. But he says, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Now, he's talking about the Roman government right here. In the Roman government, just like any government, everybody wants to have the title. Everybody wants to have the entitlements, the biggest, they want to get the benefits. They want the pomp and the circumstance to be admired. And, how do I orient this around myself? And it's really a self-serving leadership model. And then Jesus, he breaks out four of my favorite words in the New Testament right here. He says, not so with you. He says, not so with you. Because, see, these are the guys that he's about to hand this whole enterprise off to. I mean, he's going to hand the keys to this whole movement to them. And he says, hey, you see how leadership works in the world. You see how everybody uses their platform to try to get ahead and get it to benefit them and what they want and benefit their position. But he's like, not so with you. That's not the way we roll. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you actually must be like a servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So this is the Son of Man. This is Jesus talking about himself right here, saying, I didn't come to be served. I actually came to serve. And by the way, this is God's character on display right here. And to give his life as a ransom for many. I mean, Jesus is pointing us to the cross and what he was about to do in giving his life. And they didn't fully understand it, but he's trying to help them grasp this. He's like, I'm about to put something on display that's not only going to take your sin away, but it's going to take your breath away. Because I'm going to do something that's not at all about benefiting me, but I'm going to use my platform for your benefit. He says, that's right there how we roll. See, I think what he's trying to help us see is that leadership is not a platform to be served, but to serve. In fact, if you're interested in just, taking this with you this week, for me, I've been like, that's been on my mind all week. We created a little something that you can just download right now. This phrase, not so with you. If you scan this QR code right here, you can put it on your phone, you can print it out, put it on your desk. This has been in front of me where it's like, okay, not so with you. You see all the things that happen, the way leadership works in the world, not so with you. You came to serve. This is what Jesus models for us. Jesus calls us to a different kind of leadership. It's rare. It's powerful when it happens. It's an opportunity to serve people, all right, to lift them up, to encourage them, to help them know God. It's not about being the big boss, all right? It's about serving. And it's easy to know that. I can cognitively get this. It's hard to actually live that out, but it's so powerful. If you've ever had a boss that led this way, I'm telling you, you get it. I want to make sure all of us get what Jesus is talking about right here, because again, if you're a Jesus follower, this is like what he requires of us. If you're not, this is just some really good stuff you can put into practice. So what does it look like to roll this way? All right, how do we do this? Well, I want to share with you an idea that I'm going to steal from another Jesus follower. This guy's a best-selling author. He's a guy that you may have heard of before. It's a guy by the name of Ken Blanchard. He's written a number of books. He kind of blew up a number of years ago with a book called The 5-Minute Manager. And so he gives us this picture of leadership right here. And here's how he puts it. He basically starts it like this. All right. And then he does this. You know where this is going? Anybody know what this is? It's not a Christmas tree, just in case you're wondering. All right. This is what? Yeah, this is an org chart right here, right? This is how the world works. He says this is basically how, you got somebody at the top, you got people in the middle managing people, you got people at the bottom that are, doing the work. He says this is how the world works right here, right? This is what it looks like, all right? And so you look at this, and it's important. He says, at least in business in America, this is how we do things. And the people at the top, direct the people at the bottom. And it's really important to maintain this structure. And so the people at the top, this is what's kind of unique. You may not have known this. They're called supervisors up here. You know why they're called supervisors? Because they have supervision. All right, they have a superpower. They have supervision. They have the ability to see things that perhaps other people don't have the ability to see. All right, and so we need the supervisors. But then underneath them, you go down a bit, and you also have another group down here, and these are the subordinates. And you know what the subordinates stand for? That really stands for like subordinary. All right, because like the subordinates, just like they're doing the grunt work, but they need the supervisors because like they can't see out that far. They don't have that superpower. They just have the doing power. And so the subordinates need the supervisors need the subordinates to get the job done. And so, Blanchard just goes back and forth on this and tries to lay this out. He says, this is typically how it works. All right, this is what it looks like. All right, subordinates are there to serve the top, supervisors are there to direct the bottom. But this is where Jesus steps in and goes, yeah, not so with you. That's not the way my kingdom works. Now, I will say, and Blanchard would say this as well, there's one realm where this works, and that's when you're vision casting. All right, and so this pyramid approach works when you're casting vision because like somebody's got to own, making decisions when it comes to direction and vision. And so otherwise it's like a bad date, where you're like, hey, what do you want to do? You're like, I don't know. What do you want to do? You want to go out to dinner? Sure. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to eat at? You could go on that circle like forever, right? And so somebody's got to step in and make some decisions in this, all right? And so that's true. But all other areas of leadership, Blanchard argues, and Jesus would say the same, what we have to do is actually something different. It says Jesus' model looks actually entirely different. He actually flips the model. He says, my model actually looks like this. All right, you getting the picture here? Need to keep drawing? Keep extrapolating. You guys get it? Yeah? All right. He says, when you're the leader, you're actually on the bottom. You're actually there to lift up and encourage and serve the organization. You're here to serve people. My job, I'm the point leader across. My job is actually from the bottom up to be serving and empowering the organization. Even including things like at times picking up trash. In fact, I want you to see another little snippet with Ryan Leake, who we saw a bit earlier. And he talks about this, what leaders that are in a servant posture of leadership, what things they actually do to serve the organization. Take a look.
One of the most impressive things that I've ever seen was seeing a leader of an organization vacuuming a room before the event started. At Chick-fil-A, one of the things that they instill in their leaders is leaders pick up the trash.
Yeah.
That's the line.
Right.
Leaders pick up the trash. I think leaders can kind of have the mindset of that's somebody else's job.
Right.
But at Chick-fil-A, they're like, no, leaders pick up the trash. When I heard it at an event that I was doing for them, I thought, man, that's an interesting line, but is it, it's an okay line until I literally went from Atlanta to San Diego to another event. And I was walking with a leader, and there was a piece of trash on the ground, and literally she kicked it underneath the bleachers. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. Leaders should pick up the trash.
Yeah, so that's what leaders do. They pick up the trash. It's like, when you see that, you see a leader, it's like, yeah, that's not my job. Man, that doesn't set well. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're a point leader, whether it's in a neighborhood association or at your workplace, that you're doing every little thing. Part of your job is to empower people to make up the team to do that. But what it also means is there's nothing below me that I can't do. I hesitate to show this to you, but I'm going to. I'm going to go perhaps against my better judgment because I don't always get this right. But I don't know, a year and a half or so, I actually had a moment where I got this right. It was a Sunday morning, and it's similar to kind of what we've had these last few days. Storms are just blowing through, and there's debris everywhere. And our team comes in to do services, and there's water like that had come under the doors and so on and so forth, and they're trying to just get the building ready, and all this debris out on the front patio. And so I'm like, hey, I'll jump in. I got my iPad in my back pocket there, and I'm blowing off the sidewalk. And one of my friends actually caught me in the middle of this and posted it online. And part of me was like, oh man, I should have found someone to do that. I'm like, no, this is actually what leaders do. Like if that's what's needed in that moment, you step in and you do this. All right, my job is actually to serve in various ways. Now, it's not just in, blowing off a sidewalk. It's to empower, leaders empower so your team flourishes, so people can live out their God-gifted calling. I mean, not being mean and not micromanaging and, developing people, encouraging them forward in their calling. I mean, allowing them to thrive, not, stealing recognition, but actually encouraging and celebrating others when recognition is needed. I mean, my job is just to champion these things, not to be served, even if it involves cleaning up the trash. Now, when you hear that, I know some of us go, I think I operate that way. I mean, I'm pretty nice in my job. I mean, in my position, I think I do that mostly. That's called cognitive bias right there. And so I'm going to ask that you and me, because I'm a part of this with you, that we just kind of tap the brakes on this for a second, all right? Because I know for me, I'm not always that good of a leader right there, right? There's moments like that. But I think that there's places where perhaps we can continue to grow and be better. In fact, there's another author by the name of Jim Collins, and he did some research a few years ago. And you may know him. He did a couple books. Built to Last was one. A Good to Great is his most famous book. In fact, I think a lot of this research came out of that. And one of his biggest discoveries was that he found, as he looked at companies and organizations that went from being good to being great, like just really, hitting their mission, he found that there were a lot of things that different companies were doing that were really good, but he said, but in the ones that moved from the good status to the great status, 100% of them actually had some unique traits in their leadership structure, in their leadership culture. And he called these L5 leaders or a level 5 leader. And he said these were the traits that were true of 100% of the organizations that went from good to great. He said the person leading that organization is humble, they're teachable, they care more about the mission than they do about the advancement within the organization, and they see leadership as a platform to serve, not to be served. Basically, any organization that makes the jump from being good to great, he says, these are the things that were the common thread in every single one. That kind of leader was present. Now, I think it's fascinating because Jim Collins doesn't profess to be a Christian. In fact, I'll tell you a little story in a moment where he actually says that. I think it's cool that the model he's using is actually based on the way Jesus designed leadership to work. I mean, I don't know if Jim knows that, but I mean, this is why it works. In fact, a few years ago, Jim was speaking at a conference for a bunch of high-profile pastors, like a round table for like 50 of the largest pastors in the United States. I wasn't one of them, just in case you're wondering. I've actually heard this story from someone who was there. And basically, these are people that if you've kind of been in the church world, you would know many of the leaders that were at this round table. And so what was fascinating is as he met with these pastors, he said, when I work with leaders, which he does, and that's primarily what he does, he said what he has found is that it's very rare to find this kind of level 5 leader. In fact, he said maybe 10%, if I'm generous, 10% of organizations actually have this kind of leader. And then he went on and said, I don't hang out with pastors. In fact, he said, I'm not a Christian. So I don't know your world as pastors. I don't really know it because I'm not in it. But my guess would be that in your church world, the ratio would be pretty similar. At best, if I'm generous, I'd say that perhaps 10%, perhaps maybe, being generous, of you here today, of those 50 high-profile, biggest churches in America, pastors, are actually operating as a level 5 leader. And the person that I've heard the story from said you could hear a pin drop in the room because they all knew that it was true. And as I heard this, I just thought, man, God, what would it look like for me to become more and more like that kind of leader? What would it look like for me to, I'm not Jesus, all right? So, and none of us are, so this doesn't come natural to me. But what if I could grow in becoming more and more like that? Could I really lead like that? And look, it is similar to the way Jesus led. And I want all of us to think about that. I want you to think about whatever role of leadership you have. What would it look like to lead that way? And so here's the question I want us to ask. What would that look like to be more like Jesus than you are right now? What's just one step you could take? Because it matters. It really matters. In fact, last weekend, we had a leadership lunch with a number of our leadership team here at Crosspoint, which is like our staff, and we have volunteer leaders that oversee teams and manage people, and then our prayer team. And so, I don't know, about 25 or so people, that were there. And it's always a time where I'm kind of saying, hey, here's where we are, here's where we're going. We're excited about just the momentum we've been seeing and people coming to know Christ. And we're moving into Easter. It's a really, really important season where people will come to church and may not otherwise go to church, but they'll make spiritual steps. So we're just preparing for that season, what we believe God wants to do through the next few weeks. And so I asked the leaders, I said, if you were inviting someone, because I wanted some feedback. I said, if you were inviting someone that perhaps doesn't really know Christ or isn't, going to church, but they're willing to come with you on Easter, and then they're willing to come back the next week, something connects or God just kind of moves in them and they go, I'll give this a shot, I'll come back. Because that's a really big deal when you come back like a second time. I said, what kind of things do you think the people that you're inviting, what would they like to hear? Like what topics are important to them? And we got all kinds of good ideas. I mean, things like, how to deal with the uncertainty that's going on in our world right now. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of unrest just within people's spirit and just a lot of unrest. So how do we deal with that? Marriage, relationships, always a good topic. How to deal with me and my hot mess. Like we all got our own mess going on. But then one of our leaders said, she said, well, my mom used to say this phrase, and I've got this friend who recently said this to me. She said, maybe we need to talk about how to save yourself from the Christians. And she said, let me explain what I mean. She said, my friend, she's just began to dabble in faith, but she sees so many Christians, and especially when they get vocal and out on social media and in all these political channels, and they're spewing venom and so hateful and so unloving. And she's just like, if that's what it looks like to move more and more closer to Jesus, she's like, count me out on that. So maybe we need to talk about how do we save ourselves from that. I'm like, wow. It really matters. Leadership, the way you serve others really does matter. And so what would that look like to be more like Jesus than you are right now? All right, because most people, again, they spend their waking hours with you in your workspaces. All right, so how do we do that? I've been thinking about that. I'm going to give you one of the things I'm working on, but I want us all to identify, this is one of our next steps. What's one thing I can do this week? All right, and so I want you to be processing. I'll tell you mine. For me, I meet with a lot of people every week. I meet with my staff team, people from within Crosspoint. I meet with people, from our community, vendors, other pastors. I just have a number of meetings every single week. And one of the things that I want people to experience when they walk away from any meeting that I have with them, if we're planning something or perhaps we're having a difficult conversation, I want them to be lifted up and encouraged. I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel heard. I want their spirit to be lifted. I want them to feel valued and appreciated and understood. And I've been actually practicing this for a few days as I've started wrestling through this and just saying, okay, God, would you help me do this? It's pretty amazing when you ask God to help you move towards something, because here's what's crazy. You begin to move toward whatever you pray for. And so you begin to pray, God, how do I move toward this? It's amazing how you're going to begin to move toward that. It's been pretty cool, some meetings that, had some tension in them, but I could actually see energy when people walked out. And that's like the cool power of leadership, that you can actually have that effect, or it can actually, be the opposite. So that's my deal right there. You can steal mine if you want. If you're like, that sounds good. Maybe that's where you want to grow this week. How about this one? Maybe it's approachability as a leader. This story we looked at with Jesus and the mom and the two sons. This is crazy, awkward. Think about this. This is God who came to earth in the form of flesh and love, Jesus. And this mom has a conversation about her two sons, and it's quite a conversation saying, hey, do you think my sons could be like your right and left hand guys? They're pretty amazing. And I just think it's pretty cool that she actually felt like she could have that conversation with Jesus. He was approachable on that. I think it's also pretty cool. He didn't shame him. He didn't shame her. He didn't yell at her and be like, pull out like Mr. T, like, beautiful, what are you doing? You can't do that. He didn't shame her at all, right? He just is like, well, I just don't know that you know what you're asking. All right. In fact, can you drink from this cup? You're gonna drink from that, all right. But I just don't know that you fully know what we're getting into. But he doesn't shame them. Even when the disciples were talking about being the greatest and arguing, hey, I want this role and you shouldn't have it. Jesus doesn't shame them or come down on them. He actually says, hey, he pulls them together. He says, hey, you can be the greatest, but you do that by going to the back of the line, by serving and actually giving your life away. And so he was approachable. He has all these different people that, think about the people that approach Jesus. It's people who are missing missing the mark. Sinful people missing it. We're all sinful people, but there's some people that they know they're missing it. It's funny how the people that really know they're missing it, man, they were always approaching Jesus. I mean, lepers, outcasts, the marginalized, they're completely comfortable because Jesus was approachable. I mean, there's a powerful leadership lesson right there that the creator of the universe, Jesus, is approachable. So how about us? Are we approachable? Maybe that's one. I mean, I could go on and on. There's all kinds of lessons here. What would it look like for you to be a little more like Jesus this week? To think about the people you lead. Am I developing them? Am I speaking encouraging things to them? Am I being gracious even in the hard conversations? Do I honor them? Do I listen to them? Am I open to feedback as a leader instead of getting defensive? And so right now in your heart, or maybe you want to put it in your phone or write it down. What's one thing you could begin to move on that God's putting on your heart? Say, okay, I'm going to move to try to become a little more like Jesus. And be amazed at what you might begin to see. Now, we're actually going to do something here. We're going to do a little spiritual activity here before we wrap up. In fact, this was something Jesus left us. He called us to do this like over 2,000 years ago. He said, hey, I want you to do these things. And again, if you're like new to church and you're like, are they going to bring the snakes out at this point? Like what's going on? Like, what is this thing? No, none of that. You can relax. When you came in today, you got a bag like this. Why don't you go ahead and hold this bag? And you might go, okay, what is this? Well, this is a worship experience in this bag, is what this is. This is one of the ways that we actually can honor Jesus for being the kind of leader that instead of saying, hey, you're here to serve me, he actually came to serve you and to serve me. As a reminder that you and I actually get to do the same. And so Jesus, during his last meal with his team, he actually picked up the bread on the table, he broke it, and he passed it around, and he began to say, every time you eat this bread from this day forward, I want you to remember my body's about to be broken for you. I don't think they had any idea what was going on. But he said, my body's about to be broken for you. I mean, I'm going to take all the sin of the world, and all the things that you've done that there should be a penalty for. I'm going to take that on myself. I'm going to pay the price for that. And then he picked up the wine and he passed it around and he said, this represents my blood given for you. And he says, I'm doing all of this so that you can have an entirely different arrangement through which you're able to relate to God. And so this is why we drink, the juice in this case. This is juice in your bag, and we eat the bread. Because it reminds us thousands of years later of how Jesus served us and how you and I are here to actually serve others. So a couple things as we do this. Some call this the Eucharist, the Mass, the Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper. It's all in one the same. We want to invite you to share in this today. If you're tuning in online, grab something to eat, something to drink, whatever you have. God knows your heart on this. You can participate in this moment with us. Some of you might be going, okay, can I do this? This is my first time here. We have open communion here at Crosspoint. All right, and so Jesus didn't give a ton of instructions on who this was for and who it wasn't for. So if you just are like, man, I want to honor Jesus this way. I want to do what he invited me to do by taking his body. And if that's a part of you moving closer to him, or maybe even embracing him for the first time, or maybe you know Jesus and that's just part of you just celebrating him, then man, I think Jesus would be honored by that. And at the same time, I think it will help you in your journey. And it's just a way for us to connect and commune with God. So I want to invite you in a moment. We're going to share this. Sometimes we come up front and give you some space and we sing some songs, but we're going to do this all together in our seats. Before we do that, I just want to give you a moment to just have a quiet moment with God. You might want to close your eyes. You can leave your eyes open if you want, but just spend a moment telling God what's on your heart right now. Perhaps thanking him, maybe sharing some gratitude. Whatever it is, just take a moment to share that with him. All right, I want to invite you to go ahead and open up your bag and take out your bag of crackers if you haven't already done so, and you can open those up. Jesus, he just took the common bread off the table. There's nothing magical about it. But he said, every time you eat this bread from this day forward, I want you to remember my body, which was broken for you. When you do this, you're honoring me, you're remembering me, and you're remembering what I have done on your behalf. So let's go ahead and take and eat. You can go ahead and open up the juice vial. He passed the wine around the table. We have juice. And he said, every time you drink this cup, I want you to remember that, in order for there to be a redeeming or a renewing, a forgiving of sins, something has to give of its life. And so Jesus said, I'm about to take on all of that on your behalf. And so every time you drink this cup, I just want you to remember what I've done for you. So he says, let's honor Jesus by drinking. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you right now for your grace, for your goodness, for your mercy, for becoming sin for us, for taking on our sin, for creating an on-ramp so that we could know you and experience you in an entirely different way because of what Jesus did for us. We want to celebrate that. We want to thank you for that. I just pray that you'd help us to learn even more and more this week what it means to be that kind of person, to be that kind of leader, one who leads by serving. And we pray these things in your identity, Jesus. Amen. Amen. All right, you know what's kind of crazy about that right there is this whole deal right here, this is like God inviting us to be a part of the bigger work that he's doing in the world. Like you get to be his representative, and don't freak out by that. Like don't go, oh my gosh, what if I drop the ball? God will fill in the gaps, but guess what? You get to actually be his light and to be his presence in the dark recesses of our world. I mean, think about this. There's going to come a day, 10 years, 20 years down the road, where you may look back and go, man, God used me in that context. And there are people that actually saw God or perhaps even got to experience him because of what he was doing through me. And you get to be a part of that. So as we go back to work this week, back to school this week, some of you are spring breaking this week, I want us to go into it with a whole new intentionality. I want us to go out and say, hey, I get to represent God in the world and kind of be an on-brand ambassador for Jesus. So we're going to end our service a little bit different this weekend. You guys cool with that? All right, you guys cool with that? All right, we're going to end it different this weekend. Normally, we do like a worship song right here. This weekend, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to send you out here with some energy and some oomph, all right? Because I want you to go after working hard and representing God in your work life this week. So let's go ahead and stand. We're going to put our hands together. We're going to take care of some business this week. You guys ready to take care of some business, get after it, and actually allow God to use you in your workspaces? So put your hands together. Brad would love you to sing along. There's some like bar sing-along moments in this song. So let's put our hands together and let's getting after our business. Let's do it.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform, and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.